People don't leave jobs, they leave toxic environments. This is the pathway to interrupt the hidden patterns that drive turnover and what to do about it. My name is Judy K. Herman, and here's what is behind everything that I do. Here's the big idea. The big idea is that you are meant to live better relationships and a better life. If you have better relationships, you will automatically have a better life. And ask me how I know. There's a story behind it. And here's what I want to do, make this a very concise presentation so that you can really get some benefit. If this were live, I'd be asking you all kinds of questions, but I'm going to move right into the content. So here is what you're going to be discovering today. You're going to discover the pathway to set healthy boundaries without harming professional relationships. And then you're also going to learn or discover how to turn those intense conflicts into calm, productive conversations. And we're also going to lead without overfunctioning. And in short, what we want to do is we want to create a culture of emotional and psychological safety. You might ask, well, what does that mean? And there's actually another term for it, is to have like a collaborative work environment. That's what researchers call this feeling of aliveness. It's a friendly place with the right mix of pleasure and involvement, and a team that just naturally goes out of its way for each other. Now, I had up close and personal experience of this when I went to visit Ecuador. Actually, I was there, and I also do retreats internationally. And so we actually, at the end of our retreat, we visited Cuenca, Ecuador, and we saw something that we would rarely see here in the United States. And it is a group of chefs at a restaurant. Once they found out that we were like taking pictures, they went all out to show what they're really about, and their food was absolutely delicious and they were very efficient. So here's what you would see if you were at this particular restaurant. Now, doesn't that just make you happy? I'm thinking it does, because it makes me happy just watching that again. There is something about that collaboration, that teamwork, where people want to be together, they want to collaborate. But if you are experiencing the opposite in your workplace or whatever you might be dealing with, I just want to let you know, first of all, it's not your fault. And here's the reason why. It's not your fault because they didn't teach us this stuff in school. And all these power and control dynamics and everything that has been passed from one generation to another is part of our history, part of our culture, and our educational system. So we've been groomed. And it's not your fault, even if you presented this in therapy, because we're also caught up in that as well. And it's not your fault because there's so many neural pathways and a lot of subconscious things that are happening in our brains and relationships patterns that are not at work, that we're not even aware of. But all that ends today. So that lack of awareness, that is, or at least this part of your lack of awareness. So what I'd like you to do is just take out your magic wand. We used to do this as kids. We used to use our imaginations, and it was so good for us. I mean, because we didn't know what we wanted to be when we grew up. And we somehow lose that, the familiarity of imagining. So I want you to just I invite you to do this with me. And if you're doing something else, this is a good time to just put that other thing away and just take some deep breaths with me. Taking deep breaths actually calms the nervous system. And I'm going to use this singing bowl because this is so powerful. I used to not think this, and it used to not even have the science and neuroscience backing it. But when you use things like this, it actually calms the nervous system. It does something. The sound healing is remarkable. Plus, I use it for my little grandkids when they come over to get them calmed down. But I use it with my clients as well. So I'm just going to invite you to take a deep, long breath with me. Take a deep breath in, and then slowly breathe out. And if you would, for a moment, stay with me in a relaxed and calm state. And just imagine yourself at a soul-nurturing retreat and feeling that deep peace inside, and that knowing that all is well at home and at work. Or imagine getting up and waking up in the morning and you look up at the sky and there's the beautiful clouds like a heart-shaped image in the sky, and you know deep within your bones that you are deeply loved. Or think about getting to work. You can't wait to get there because there's so much collaboration. It's easy and it's flowy, and things that used to really get on your nerves, or the people, the difficult people, you're able to collaborate and actually have a lot of work, and you look forward to it collaborating together. Well, you see, I've actually heard many of these stories behind the four walls of my counseling office. I'm a therapist, psychotherapist, licensed in Tennessee and Georgia, and really niching with people who are in management or positions or managing over people, and even employees that would come in and there would be, all this stuff going on, lots of toxic things. So I heard those very heavy and exhausting stories of highly capable business leaders trying to figure out messy relationships. And I get it because I've been there too. I've been there not only on a professional level, but certainly on a personal level as well. And but I believe you are a resilient human, just like we all are. And there's ways that we've learned to cope. For me, it has been writing, journal writing, in the privacy of my, trying to figure out the stuff, and then also obviously raising four kids in a very troubled marriage of 30 years, then becoming a therapist, like trying to figure things out. So I decided, though, to take my private writing into the public, and it was a huge risk of growth. But I felt like the book wrote me. It's called Beyond Messy Relationships. Most therapists who write books write about the intense and dramatic stories of their clients. But for me, I wrote my own intense and dramatic story because I definitely had one. A lot of them were worse than what my clients shared with me, I'm just saying. But my second husband had bipolar disorder and a very severe mental illness attached. So there was a time I was like walking on eggshells and dealing with all of that stress, trying to figure things out. And when I realized, and it was back in COVID, and I won't tell you the whole story because whole stories, not the whole story, but a lot of the stories in the book. Don't want to do a spoiler alert. Long story short is when I knew that my second marriage was not viable and having to deal with like being a relationship therapist and all this stuff, that's when I did some more searching, trying to figure things out, being curious. What would my life look like? Will I still be a relationship therapist, and so on? But anyway, I interviewed a lot of experts in marriage and family therapists and entrepreneurial couples who have figured it out. Not perfect, but that's what my podcast is all about: better relationships, better life. And you can tap into that. I can give you the QR code if you'd like. But I wrote my second book also just to help me identify those principles, and that came a lot out of those interviews and my own story. But that became the C.A.L.M method, which is what you're going to discover today. But that second book is Relationships with Purpose, Secrets to Better Relationships and a Better Life, which is a lot applies to couples, but certainly there's a lot that applies to work relationships as well. So I want to ask you a question, and maybe you can just answer this privately. Which is harder for you? Is it harder to have those difficult conversations, or is it harder to recover from the difficult conversation? So you can just make note of that or write that in a journal. And I do want to just let you know, 20 minutes complimentary, and there's a QR code if you're interested in doing that. But let me get right into the C.A.L.M method. And this is the C.A.L.M method that actually interrupts those hidden patterns that drive turnover. So the C is clarity, and the A is awareness, awaken. And so with the C, you're going to be clarifying your situation. Every situation is different. We don't know if that difficult person that we have some interactions with, are they somewhere on that narcissistic scale? I'm not going to say people are not full-blown narcissist or not, but they might be somewhere on the scale or not. But we can figure out what your situation is, and that clarity is so important because that makes a difference on how you do communicate with them and how you do recognize those hidden patterns and do something about them. So then we also have awaken the subconscious patterns so that you can break the cycle. I'm going to go through each one of these individually so that you'll know exactly what I mean. And then we're also going to lift above the drama. When everything is going haywire underneath, it's kind of like, in the storm. If you've ever been in a storm and then you go underwater and everything is calm, but the storm's going on, well, that's kind of going under. But anyway, my acronym is like lifting above that drama, and you'll see what I mean about that in a moment. And then also mastering effective communication. Now, you might already have some awesome and remarkable communication skills. I get that, but a lot of people, most people, are not aware of some of the little phrases, little words that can be used and put that person in a defensive mode. And so we're talking about effective communication. Okay, so let's go through, clarify your situation. This is so important because yes, I have been a couples counselor and still am, working mainly with entrepreneurial couples, but I also do retreats for women mainly at this point, and also deal with men as well. But I do a lot of retreats in immersive situations. So, but going back, a thorough assessment is so very important. Because what I've discovered in my couples counseling, and actually this applies not just with couples, but also in any kind of work situation and any kind of difficulty you're going through. If you're having difficulty with another human being, likely 97% of that conflict with that other person has to do with issues before the age of 9 years old. That person from work might remind you of somebody that, well, consciously you think that they don't, but subconsciously there's some things going on. So it's important to be, and I want to also just bring up one other thing because this is really important, that we have a situation, but then we have what you call the narrative about that situation. I can give you some examples of that. But neurologically speaking, the brain wants to close the gap. And the brain will have a story about that other person, whether or not it's true, and it's likely a negative story because that's what we've inherited for many generations before is, humans had to develop a skill of surviving. And so our brains and our nervous systems and that very primitive part of us, which all of us have because we're human, we're on the lookout unconsciously realizing we're looking for danger, and we will make then up a story if somebody looks at you a certain way. So I do want to give a real quick story here. I was working with a manager recently and was really frustrated about one of his workers that was having an issue with one of her colleagues, and what he said was that this woman, this other worker, reminded her of her irresponsible son. Or it might have been a husband. I can't remember what the situation was. But so this manager was telling me that story, and I said, well, did this person tell you that? No. It was a story that he had in his mind, but he didn't realize it was a story that was working undercurrent. And here's the thing. This is not we make up stories. And we recognize those things and we'll put a story to it. And it might be a thing from our own past and our own history. So I hope some of that makes sense. And it may not, but I'm going to move on because really it's our relationships, both past relationships and future relationships, and actually our current relationships. That person that just really gets on your nerves is they're mirroring something about you. Otherwise, you would not have some energy and irritation with that person, but it's all undercurrent. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next thing here. I hope you don't hear that airplane that's going overhead, and if you do, I'm going to pause. The next thing is awaken subconscious patterns. We touched a little bit on this, but I do want to mention to you, by the time a person is 35 years old, we're talking about 97% of thoughts that 35-year-old has to do, number one, they're repetitive thoughts. They're thoughts from the past. They're thoughts that have been embedded in your timeline. It's thoughts from parents, grandparents, and generations back. They're not even your thoughts. Those are things that are happening undercurrent, and we don't know till we get them out. All right, so another thing about that 95% of thoughts that are repetitive, not even yours, not even new ones. We're talking about 80% of those are negative. Again, we can go back to what the brain is looking for. And so we have these subconscious patterns, and it's so important to expose these, because when you're in the jar, you can't see the label. When you're in the jar, it's kind of like when fish are swimming in the water, a fish cannot identify the H2O it's swimming in. So that's why facilitating retreats are so very powerful, and how clarity is so very crucial, because when you're taken out of your own environment and in a small group of curated individuals, and then you have the guidance of someone like me who facilitates it, it's amazing what these relationships are like mirrors. It's not just them coming to see me as a therapist, but you've got other people that are mirroring back what you cannot see yourself. All right, I'm going to also mention this. This is actually a picture of my younger self before my conscious memory. I'm the little girl in the yellow dress. I'm the one that's wearing binoculars around her neck. And here, truth be told, every one of us as children, we have, or even as adults, all of us as humans, we either move toward pleasure or away from pain. Now, when we're little children and our little brains are being developed, and they're not online yet until mid-20s or so or beyond, but that's where the subconscious patterns are being developed. Okay, so that's where so if we don't become aware of what these automatic thoughts are that were developed in our early childhood, in which we're trying to survive our childhoods, we take those defenses and we take them into our adult relationships. But the brain doesn't know the difference, right? It's those gut punches that happen, and the brain is always looking for what's familiar. So honestly, if you're working around people that kind of remind you of certain family relationships, there's a reason why. So, and there's a reason why some of these are repetitive. But here's the invitation: is to change, interrupt that pattern. So, because you can't change anything that you can't interrupt. So, yes, I do want to mention this also with the retreats that I facilitate. Some of the pre-retreat work or activities that I ask my participants to do. One of those is writing out their relationship timeline. And then we'll have a volunteer that is volunteering to be coached by me in front of the rest of the group. But it's so interesting because we can make some connections, and we also do what you call like a family tree type of thing. It's called a genogram, and it seems so clear when you get it out on a marker board with colored markers, and there's some patterns that just jump out, and there's so much transformation. So then let's just move on, because the L. Let me tell you about the L of the C.A.L.M method. Our nervous system and our daily habits and our automatic thoughts, they're all routines, they're all factors that keep those hidden patterns in place. Well, how do we lift above the drama? But truth be told, that's why retreats and intensives versus going to a counselor's office once a week for 50 minutes or once every 2 weeks for 50 minutes. That's why it's not near as effective. But let me tell you a story. There was a time when I was in St. Croix, one of the Virgin Islands, and our group went on a horseback riding excursion. So we are getting lined up with whose horse is whose and who has experience that can handle this horse and so on and so forth. So my horse's name was Gingy, and our guide is Cowboy Steve. So Gingy and I are riding in the middle of our group in this narrow path, and it takes us just smack dab in the middle of the beach. And so Cowboy Steve is leading our groups into the Caribbean Sea. Okay, we're wading our horses like they're wading ankle deep, and then they get to the knee part of the horse, and we just keep on riding. And it's getting to the point where our saddles are beginning to get wet. So Cowboy Steve knew that I was a cheerleader because with our small talk on the way over there. And so sure enough, I stood on top of Gingy's back, right there in the overlooking this clear blue Caribbean Sea. And in that moment, it could be frozen because my whole body feels alive. I was lifted up just like I had been as a cheerleader years ago, and that aliveness as a young person. And oh, the drama that I was going through still exists. But in that moment, I was lifted and free and alive. Just that whole experience became an iconic experience. And it was a choice. It was a change to return to and aliveness and freedom. Here's the thing. Talk therapy only goes so far. Talking with a coach only goes so far. Teachings only go so far. But the experiences that your body has, you can be lifted above this in a way that your whole nervous system experiences it. And then when you go back into that situation, you can still be lifted up with our imagination. I think it's remarkable. I think it's so cool. Amy was one that had gone on one of my international retreats, and she said the assignments have shown me a different perspective and helped me to find more of myself way beyond any relationship stress. And then Denise, also, she's a businesswoman here in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and a business owner. And she says, my life has been beyond hectic, but Judy has given me the tools to help identify the patterns that I now have the liberty to change. One other beautiful thing about travel, and I was in India in 2023. Yes, this is really me, and this is really at the Taj Mahal. It was awesome. But notice there's this optical illusion, right, that I'm hanging on to it. And that's so important to be able to change our perspective. Rising above the former life is all about changing those automatic, or being aware and changing those automatic patterns. All right, now for the M, the C.A.L.M method. This is about mastering communication. Now, I get it. A lot of you already know some good communication, but there's times in which conversations can take you sideways. All right. So in addition to working with companies, I've also done these half-day retreats for families, and I do want to tell you a particular story because I have this remarkable method called Communologue. So with Communologue, I don't know if I can show you a picture of it, but not a picture of it. But anyway, it's like a way to communicate in a group setting where you can be fully heard, where you can be fully understood, where you can take your deep breaths of air and calm your nervous system. Okay, so this family, two parents, and a 12, 10, and 8-year-old. Now, the 10-year-old, the little boy, did not want to be there on that Saturday from 10 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. He was complaining about it. Anyway, by the end of that half-day retreat, he looked at his parents and he said, I can't believe we talked this way in such a short amount of time. I can't believe we learned to talk this way in such a short amount of time. You know how kids are and siblings and how they can, yeah. It was amazing. if kids can do this, certainly adults can. And we can change the culture of our relationships at work. All right, well, here's what happens though with communication. A lot of times it looks like a ping pong game: accusation, defensiveness, back and forth, back and forth. Nobody's listening to each other. Well, you can always put your paddle down and just refuse to play. Now, I'm not talking about being a doormat. I'm talking about being able to speak your truth in such a way where it can be heard. And so another retreat that I was on or facilitated, and we were doing the communal log. It was amazing because this one particular person, the retreatant, I call them retreatants, they're participants, she said learning this communal log technique has just really transformed her workspace. And like being able to communicate with her team, it was amazing because really what we all long for is to be heard and understood. So that's the communal log. That's how you spell the thing. You won't find that in the dictionary, and it's just through the training that I've had, the specialty training with my imago therapy, but also incorporating it into my own proprietary. But we've got the C.A.L.M method. And again, we're talking about, in review, clarifying your situation, awaken the ways to break the cycle, recognizing those subconscious patterns that you wouldn't see otherwise. It's lifting yourself above the drama and mastering effective communication. So here's the thing, going back to the big idea. You are meant to live with better relationships. And when you master having or surround yourself with better relationships, you definitely will have a better life. Okay? Here's what I would absolutely love to have happen before you stop this recording is write, actually, if you were to email me, it would be so wonderful. It's Judy@judycounselor.com. And one thing you're taking away today, one word or phrase, go ahead and share that if you would. You can actually reach me also if you want to connect on LinkedIn. It's LinkedIn Judy K. Herman. Would love to connect with you there and let me know that you watched this. That would be great. And then that's mainly the main thing. And then my website is judycounselor.com where you can find out more information. But let me go right back to that QR code in case you would like to take advantage of the clarity call. That's a clarity call schedule. I'd love to talk with you more, and it's a pleasure to meet you here, and let me know how this was helpful to you. Okay? Thank you so much.